Welcome. I want to thank you for joining us for another webinar in the Center for Agricultural Profitability's series. And these usually happen every Thursday around this time at noon Central. And I'm Ryan Evans with the Center for Ag Profitability at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. You can find a schedule of all of our upcoming webinars and recordings of past webinars, including this one, which will be posted hopefully later today on our center's website. That's cap.unl.edu. And today we're looking at the issue of recently inherited farms, especially for non-farming landowners. So if you've inherited a farm here in Nebraska, you don't know where to start, this webinar is definitely designed for you. And if you need help navigating ownership, leasing, and legal responsibilities, we hope to answer some of those questions today, when you will learn how to transfer the title, work with the USDA, and understand what leasing options you have, as well as managing taxes and risk. So if you're planning to lease the land or you just want to protect your asset, the webinar will walk you through each critical step to take. We definitely invite any questions that you have to be typed into the Q&A or the chat as we go, and we'll work on getting those answered before the end of the hour today. And to present, we're really glad to have with us again Anastasia Meyer, who is an agricultural economist and extension educator with the Center for Ag Profitability. Anastasia is responsible for the southeastern part of the state among our regional economists, and I will turn it over to her now. Anastasia, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Ryan. So this meeting came about. We are seeing a lot of people inheriting land, whether it's farm ground or ranch land, and it can be an overwhelming process. So this next hour, I kind of just want to cover the tip of the iceberg. I think every single one of these slides I go over in this hour could be another whole presentation, if not semesters long worth of material. So again, this is just the tip of the iceberg here. But first, I want to acknowledge this. If you have recently inherited a farm or ranch, there might be some grieving that you are involved in doing, and that's okay. You need to take that time to grieve. That doesn't mean you need to make any huge decisions right away. I'm kind of going to approach this presentation as almost a survival mode a little bit, and then I'll go into more detail on that. Maybe you've have had it a little bit longer and you're out of that survivor mode. But these are the bare basics of what you need to do once you inherit the farm or ranch. And the last thing is, you are not alone. If things are overwhelming, you're not alone. Reach out to somebody for help, whether that's just what do you do now? What are the next steps? I have questions, or if you need other kind of help, you are not alone. So again, I have to make some clarifications. I'm going to first make the assumption that you want to keep the land, at least for the foreseeable future. I'm also going to make the assumption that you don't really want to be out there farming every single day, or at least not that first year. We're kind of going to talk a little bit about if you do, but I'm going to make the assumption that maybe you don't. And then I also just want to acknowledge that this is for informational purposes only. I'm not a lawyer, an accountant, any of that. So this is really for educational purposes so that you can start thinking of questions that you might need to be asking your team for clarification on. So the first step in acknowledging where you are is understanding how you inherited the land. Typically, they're through a will. And so if you inherited land through a will, you're going to have to go through probate court for it to be transferred to the heirs. A lot of people don't really like probate court because, it can be a public thing. It's records. But we do live in the state of Nebraska where we have inheritance tax. So chances are your information is probably already out there, what the land is worth, or if somebody really wanted it, they could do the digging and finding it. The next one is a trust. There's different types of trusts. And so usually a trust will avoid probate and it will pass directly to the beneficiaries of that trust. I'll go into this a little bit more in next couple slides. If you transferred the land through a transfer on death deed. This allows you to inherit that land as soon as the owner passed away, bypasses probate, but it has to have that TODD on the deed. The joint tenant with the rights of survivorships, you're gonna see that JTWROS on the deed, and that is if you own land together, you have your equal share, they have their equal share, but if you pass away, your share goes to that other person. And then the life estate deed. A life estate deed is going to be for somebody who you're gonna give that right to use the land for their lifetime, but after it passes away, it goes to somebody else. So I like to give examples here, and just for educational purposes, I am going to act like as if this was my land, right? Or it was um, transferring to myself, right? So maybe a life estate deed is if I owned land, and I wasn't actively farming it, and I had a long-term hired hand, I want them to have the right to farm it and for their lifetime, but they don't have any heirs, or I want to make sure that maybe my nephews inherited the land once he is done using it. I would have a life estate deed because when my hired hand would then pass away, that remainder man gets the deed. So that's one way that we like to clarify what it is, how you're inheriting land, what it means when you inherit the land. So, what do you need to do? Regardless of how you inherited the land, you're going to probably need to work with a Nebraska estate attorney. It might be worth your money to make sure that everything is done properly, but these are the bare basics I would do. First, you're going to contact the county register of deeds where the land is located. You're going to request a copy of that deed, and you're going to verify that information. What do I mean when I say verify the information? You're going to look at the deed and see if it says anything like life estate, if it says TODD, if you are a joint tenant with rights of survivorship. You're going to see how exactly you inherited it. If nothing is in there, it might be, through that will or however you inherited it. And then you're going to contact that state attorney and go through the steps to transfer it in your name. Maybe it's as simple as having a death certificate, bringing it in, or other legal steps that you need to do. And then the next one is bolded because I think everybody who inherits land should consider having an appraisal done, especially if you think that you're going to be selling it in your lifetime or you think there might be a possibility of it. And this is because you inherited that piece of land, so you received a stepped up basis. Now, the amount of stepped up depends on how you inherited it. Again, this is a tip of the iceberg presentation. But you received a step up in basis, likely. And if you are wanting to have the possibility to sell it and have an accurate portrayal for taxes, for capital gains taxes, all of that, you need to have that appraisal done. Now, if you know that there is no chance that you are going to sell it and that you are going to pass it on to your kids or other heirs, go ahead, skip this step. But if you think there might be a slight chance, go ahead and get that appraisal done. So going about and changing that title and ownership record. So again, you're going to contact the deed, the county where it's located. You're going to record the deed in your name. Then you're going to make sure that you contact the county assessor's office and make sure that your mailing address is correct. You're going to want to make sure that you get your tax notices and any other pertinent information on your land. Let's have this information correct so that you don't have any late fees or anything that we might miss in the future. What do you need to bring? You need to have your ID, any probate, trust, LLC, any other legal documentation, and then you probably need a death certificate as well. Your estate attorney will help you with the exact steps of what you need pertaining to your individual circumstances, but it is important to notice or mention that you're going to have a lot of these different things that you're going to need. Maybe you have a binder that you have ready to go to each place. Then I also think it's important to understand who makes the decisions for your land. Again, I'm going to use some examples here, right? So let's say I just inherited a quarter of land. In the sole ownership, I get to make all the decisions. I get to make everything because I am the sole owner. There is only one. I can do whatever I want with my land. And I don't need anybody else's permission. So if I wanted to sell my land and my brother was mad at me, guess what? I own the land, I own the gold, I make the decisions, right? Let's talk about the joint tenants with the right of survivorship, okay? So let's say my brother and I inherited land and my parents passed it on, joint tenants with rights of survivorship. Okay, so we each own 50-50%. Joint tenants with rights of survivorship has equal share. So however many people are in this situation, they're all going to have an equal share. Which means everybody has to agree on the same decision. No one can really act um, for another unless a power of attorney is granted. And so this can be kind of complicated if the owners do not have a shared vision for the land, right? Because do I talk to one person who really wants um, maybe their land to be enrolled into conservation program, and then another one who wants to get the most money, but doesn't care about conservation so much. This is where it kind of gets a little bit complicated. So this is why I think it's important to understand who's making those decisions. So then let's say, yes, I still own this ground with my brother with joint rights, with rights of survivorship. If one of us dies, it doesn't go to our kids, it goes to the other person. So if I pass away, my shares would not go to my kids, but it'd go right to my brother. Okay. We really want to be specific on what each one of these means. So then another common way to own land is tenants in common. If I were to sell my joint rights with survivorship, and sell my share when we were both alive, that would now be void and we would now be tenants in common. So tenants in common is kind of the same, but we're allowed to have unequal division of shares. So I could have 70% and my brother could have 30%. Tenants in common allows you to do this, but you still need to have unanimous decisions in agreements. Now, it could be thought that, majority of the ownership could have majority of decisions, but both of these ways of owning land, you don't own 50 acres of this quarter, or let's see, a quarter. So you don't own 80 and 80. You own one half of every single acre on that ground. So in tenants in common, I don't own 70% divided. I want the good 70% of this quarter. No, I own 70% of every single acre on that ground. So this kind of has some complications in it, right? At any time you can sell, you can force partition, and this is why we see these issues here, right? If one person wants to sell and another doesn't, they could be forced to sell it. The other is a trust-owned land. Now, the trustee is going to be making the decisions in the trust, not the beneficiaries. You can have complete control of the land as a trustee or limited. This is all just going to be dependent on what that trust document says and what the limitations are stated in that trust. So some have more, some have less, just really depends. And so this is why you need to take that trust document with you when you go and get the deed titled, when you go to these next couple places that we're going to talk about. And then the last is LLC owned land. There's two different types of management in LLC. The first one is manager managed, and that means that they named a manager It can be part of the LLC or it could be somebody like a farm manager, but they are the ones making the decisions. So the beneficiaries do not get to vote on the daily operations unless it is specifically lined out in that LLC document. Okay. So if you are thinking about making your LLC a manager manage and you want to have input, you're going to lose that input if you are a um yeah, if you're just a member and you're not the actual manager. So be careful how you set this up if you want to have those decision capabilities. The next one is a manager managed LLC or a member managed LLC. Sorry, my bad. And this is when all members share those decisions. So whether everyone gets together and makes the votes, whether, the day-to-day operations is by the operator farming it, but the large decisions are member managed. Again, this is all going to be how you set up your LLC. And this is why you have to have that documentation when you go to the certain offices to make sure that you have the authority to make those decisions. So you got the land, you got the deed changed over. Now the next thing is, what are we doing with the land? Well, what's currently being done? Who's farming or ranching the land right now? If you have unexpectedly inherited it and you lost a loved one and it's in the middle of the growing season, whether crops or pastures, you might consider a custom hire. And what a custom hire means that you are the operator, but you're not actually spending any time in the pastures in the field. You're paying somebody else to do it, but all the income is yours after you pay them. Okay. So that's one way. If somebody's already leasing the land, there's a couple different questions that you should be asking. First of all, who are they if you don't know them? And then the next one is there a written contract? What does it say? Because yes, there's verbal lease laws in Nebraska that states if there's no written lease, these are the parameters of it. But if you have a written contract, that's what we're going to have to go by, right? So do you have a written contract? What type of lease do you have? What does the lease say? When does it end? When are the payments made? What exactly is your responsibility or their responsibility? Hopefully there is a written lease. Chances are, I think right now our survey said that about 50% of leases in Nebraska are still verbal, a handshake agreement. And so this is why we're really urging people to have that written contract so that, accidents happened. And so leases could be transferred to the next generation. Let's make sure that we are both covered as land owners and tenants. So when I say what type of lease do you have? These are the common types of leases in Nebraska. The first one is cash rent. And how that works is the farmer pays you a certain amount of dollar per acre. And that's usually only on the tillable acres in cropland or pasture, the grass acres. So if you have some hay meadows in your field, that's going to be a different rent than the tillable acres that are being farmed. And a pasture, usually cash rent or is paid by at least dollar per head, that kind of a thing. But it's a guaranteed amount that you're going to get. It has very low risk to the landowner. It's a steady income. The tenant's going to hold most of the risk, and because they hold most of the risk, they get to make the decisions. And so your landowner involvement is going to be pretty minimal, right? Hopefully we're talking more than twice a year, then here's your check and what am I paying? But your landowner involvement is going to be pretty minimal. The next one is going to be a crop share. And when I say crop share, it means that you get a certain percentage of the crop. There's a lot of different percentages that are being broken out. So 50-50, 60-40, one-third, two-thirds, 70-30. It really is going to fall depending on where you fall in the state of Nebraska, right? On the eastern half, we see a lot of 50-50s or 60-40s, depending on if they're irrigated, dry land, what's the soil type, all of that. As we work our way west, we see a lot more of the 70-30 leases because there's less rain, there's more of a risk in farming. Um, so that's why we see the smaller percentage. And then that smaller percentage is going to be that share that goes into the landowner's hands. So this makes you guys, both the tenant and the landowner, share in the profit and the loss, and your involvement is going to be a lot higher than cash rent because you are paying for some inputs. You are going to have to market your crop. They're going to take the crop to the elevator. You're going to have to market it. If you are a landowner who does not know how to market or does not want to manage any of the marketing, you could ask your tenant or you could hire a farm manager. But you need to have that good communication with them to um, have that discussion with them. And then the flexible lease. Be honest, I haven't seen a flexible lease that is the same from one to another. So the rent will adjust depending on the yields and prices, however you have it set up. You have a shared risk, it's kind of complex. Your involvement is going to be depending on how you're setting it up. If you have a flex lease agreement, make sure that you are going to have everything lined out. What you're setting the prices on, what yields you're using, the dates, all of that, so that there's no chance of miscommunication, so that everybody knows that they're getting treated fairly. I have a lot more to say on this, but again, I am limited to an hour today, so I'm going to try and get through. We have a lot more resources available. I'll share those towards the end, okay? Now, this is a lot of alphabet soup, right? We have RMA, we have NRCS, CRP, FSA. And so what this is a whole bunch of acronyms that we use in farming. If you ever see these, don't hesitate to ask what they mean. Sometimes we just kind of get into autopilot and we don't do a good job in explaining of what they mean. Now, they are color coded on this slide. Okay. So the blue is going to be all related to the risk management agency, and they are the overlying authority of crop insurance. So all of the blue are going to be related to crop insurance. And then all of the yellow, orangish color, that's all going to be related to the USDA, United States Department of Agriculture programs and different acronyms. So FSA, Farm Service Agency, is probably going to be the one that I'm going to talk the most about today, but they are tied in together. So whatever we do at the crop insurance at FSA, we need to make sure that our records are matching at each one because they are both under the United States Department of Agriculture. They share records. And if we're calling one thing, let's say Anastasia Meyer's farm, and the next one, let's say Meyer Farm, we're going to cause some discrepancy and we're either going to have some late payments or disqualify some payments. So let's make sure that we get our record straight and we keep the same titling of everything. So let's first talk about the Farm Service Agency. If you have a tenant and they refer to it as an ASCS office, they really mean the FSA office, the Farm Service Agency, or the NRCS office, which is the Natural Resources Conservation Services. Okay. I guess that's what it used to be called years ago, but now you're still going to be hearing that acronym probably, but they really mean the FSA or NRCS office. So once you have the deed titled, you have that fixed. You have figured out what you're going to do with the land for the year, whether you're farming it or you're keeping your tenant or this is your tenant. You're going to go to the Farm Service Agency. You're going to make sure that your name is on the farm now. You're going to take everything that you took to the county Courthouse, you're going to take that to the FSA office. You're going to make sure your name is on it. You're going to have farm numbers and tract numbers. And so a farm number is going to be, let's say, for example, I own a piece of ground, or I own two pieces of ground. That's my farm number. And then I have a tract number that field A and field B would be in that tract number. But every single time you add a different complication in it, it gets broke out. So if I have a farm A and I rent it to so and so, it's going to have a different farm number and tract number than if I have a different tenant for my other piece of ground. So you could have multiple farm numbers with different tract numbers, or you could have a farm number with just one tract in each one. It kind of gets complicated, but that's the difference of a farm and a tract, right? And so when you go to the FSA office, ask what your land is currently signed up for. Ask if you're in the conservation reserve program, the CRP program. Ask about that paperwork. Ask about your payments on CRP. FSA is going to give you a lot of paperwork to fill out when you first go there, and that's to get everything changed over. I would urge you guys to consider having a power of attorney at the FSA signed, and you can limit what you want them to have the authority. So if you give a power of attorney to a tenant, they could sign off on the planted acres. They could maybe enroll you in Farm Bill, depending on what you give them access to. And the reason why we might consider this is the mail can be kind of slow now. So if the mail gets lost and it doesn't get there in time, would you lose eligibility for programs? Would you have late fees? Again, power of attorney is going to be something that it's up to you on your comfort level. But I do want to be clear that power of attorney at FSA is only at the FSA office. They can't sell your land. It's only at that FSA office. So the next question is, are you eligible, right? A lot of times we get asked about, what about these farm payments? I am a landowner and I'm hearing that farmers are getting farm payments. Am I eligible to get them? Well, first off, I want to remind everybody that farm payments are a year behind. So if you're getting a farm payment for this year, it's probably for last year. So it might need to go to somebody's estate. Okay, that's the first thing. Um, the next one is the USDA FSA classifies as individuals or entities who actively share in both the crop production and its associated risk, such as yield variability and input costs, qualify for insurance, crop and livestock, and FSA program payments. Okay, so let's go through each one of the operations here. If you are the operator, if you are the farmer, you share in the yield variability and input costs. You are eligible, right? So this goes for if you are the sole farmer or if you are a crop share, you are eligible. If you are custom farming, so if you are paying somebody to go out there and plant your crops, harvest your crops, you're paying for everything, but you're just not actually sitting out there in the tractor or working the cattle. That means that you are the operator. So yes, you are eligible. A flexible lease or variable lease, that's when it gets a little bit complicated, right? Because it's all going to be depending on how you set it up. If you have one of those, take that documentation to the FSA office. They can decide if you share the risk in these or not. Because if you don't, you're not eligible. Cash rent. If I am a tenant paying cash rent, I share all of the risk. It's guaranteed. The landowner is not eligible for FSA payments or crop insurance, livestock insurance. Okay. You have to have risk. So cash rent does not have landowners eligible. Then the next question is, what about guaranteed bushel leases? We're going to focus on that one word here, and that's guaranteed. It is guaranteed. A bushel lease operates very similarly to cash rent. So no, if you are a landowner with a guaranteed bushel lease, you are not eligible for crop insurance or FSA program payments. Okay. So then let's go over the crop insurance basics. So crop insurance can be a whole semester's long worth of education, right? So these are just going to be the very common things that I think a landowner should know. There's a lot of different options out there, but most of the landowners will utilize these things. So then first one is APH, right? That is your average production history. That is what's actually been growing on your ground. How does it produce? It averages anywhere from the last 4 to 10 years, depending on your company that you're using for crop insurance. And so the question is, how do I get my APH? That's the tricky part right there. Okay. So if you are a crop share or if you inherited the ground that had been in crop share or somebody you loved was farming it, you can get your APH. That's how you figure it out. If you inherited a piece of ground that has a cash rent, um, they don't technically have to share their APH with you, okay? Because you have no risk in that. You have no share in what the actual yield is doing. You can put it in a lease that from today forward, you are wanting your yields and everything, and you want a share of you want to know the APH, but you can't ask for anything in the past. They might share it with you, but they don't have to. The coverage levels for crop insurance will go anywhere from 50% to 85%. 85% is a lot more expensive than 50%, but typically for landowners, we see most coverage level being in the 65 to 80%. Again, you get to pick this if you are in a crop share or if you custom hire it or if you actually farm. You get to pick what coverage level you want, how much you want to minimize your risk, okay? Then the next one is going to be what type of insurance do we want to get? Yield protection only protects you against yield, okay? And they protect against natural disasters, drought, hail insurance. You have to have your own certain specific hail for it. You might have excessive moisture covered into that. Um, Fun little fact, fire is not covered under your typical crop insurance. Ask me how I know. Um, but most hail insurances have a fire covered under that. So your yield protection does not care about the prices. It's only going to protect you on if your yield drops. Make sure that you read your insurance policy to cover things like wind. Make sure there's no gaps there. Your revenue protection is going to protect you both on yield losses and price decline. Okay. So if we have a year with really high yields, but prices are low, it might not be enough to trigger. So just because you have a bad year in either yield doesn't mean that you have to, you will get a payment because what if prices are the opposite? So revenue protects you on your revenue. They set the prices in the earlier in the year. They'll send you a statement right about now, actually. And if you are corn and soybean crop. So that's what the YP and the RP means if you are getting any crop insurance information. One thing you might think about at the crop insurance as well is you can have an authorized signer at the crop insurance agency. And so what this allows them to do is sign the acreage planted, have them sign it off on it, and then these are the bushels that we produced either with scale tickets or however they are certifying their bushels or bringing in that amount to the crop insurance, and then they can sign off that it's correct. You might consider doing this, especially if you live far away, because if you miss the date that it's due, you are now not eligible. Okay. So if you are relying on mail, make sure that you're getting this done well in advance or you have that authorized signer at the crop insurance. So what do you need to bring to the FSA and crop insurance? You need your legal ID. You need your documentation of how that land is, whether it's a LLC, trust, and then you need a copy of that recorded deed. If you have any complicated lease arrangements, go ahead and bring that lease in as well. That way they can see what share goes to the landowner, what share goes to the tenant. And then you might consider bringing in your tenant's phone number. They might have it at the FSA office, but still, it's good to have. And then if you are an operator, if you have a share in the risk, if you are eligible for any payments, go ahead and bring a copy of a check or your bank information. That way, in case any payments are made, you can just have a direct deposit. Let's not forget about property taxes. In Nebraska, they're due in two parts, April 1 and August 1. So the reason why I just like to bring this out here is a lot of times, landowners, if they've never owned land in Nebraska, it's easy to forget about maybe some expenses that are coming up. So make sure you know what type of lease you have, if you have any incoming expenses, and then don't forget about taxes. Make sure that you have enough saved, maybe from cash rent or from your crops being sold to pay for taxes. They're going to be paid to the county treasurer where that land is located. And then make sure that around June you are getting your assessed value. You can either go online or it should be mailed out to you. And make sure that you are checking it to see if it's accurate. Because if you want to protest it, you have to have that done by June 30th. You have to have that appeal in, and then they can schedule you, but it has to be by July 30th. And then also, recently in the state of Nebraska, there's been some property tax credits regarding community colleges. You might want to contact the accountant if you have their information that the land has had in the past, and make sure that those have been claimed. And then you have this land. You have a tenant. You have everything kind of figured out now, but let's make sure that you're protecting your assets. So the first thing is property insurance. What's on your land? Are there any structures or assets that need to be covered? It depends, right? So are you inheriting a ground with a nice Quonset house, whatever like that, and it needs to be covered? Then you probably need to have some property insurance. If you inherited it and it has some old dilapidated buildings that serve no value, and you don't really care about them, maybe you don't need to have coverage. But if you do, you need to think about, what do you want? Do you want replacement cost or the actual cash value? Replacement cost, things cost a lot more to build now than what they did in the past. You really want to make sure that you are reviewing everything, make sure that you are covered, that you avoid any gaps, or that you are at least aware of those gaps. And then make sure that, excuse me, make sure that your coverage covers any leased property. So, like I said, I'm making the assumption that you're probably going to lease out your ground. Make sure that your coverage covers it if you are leasing it out, okay? It might be a little bit more expensive, but we want to make sure that that's not one of those gaps. And then liability insurance is crucial, right? We want to make sure that if anybody gets injured on your land, that it's covered. We want to make sure that our tenants carry their own insurance on the ground as well. And then we want to make sure that the insurance matches the name that's on the deed. That's at the FSA office. That's in the crop insurance, right? So make sure that all of those names match so that everything can be properly covered. And then how much should you get? Well, the question to that is, how much do you need, right? I think you should at least have as much liability insurance as you're worth. Um, and that way, in case, if you were to get sued, you are at least covered, that your insurance would pay for it, and maybe you wouldn't have to sell your land. So I think liability insurance is crucial. Property insurance, you should consider if there's anything on that land that's worth value. And then let's review some basic ag and lease law in Nebraska. So first, you inherited the land. Talk to your attorney. See if your land has any easements. What exactly do those easements mean? Whether that's just the neighbor can drive on your driveway, or is there any other land easements, like Did somebody sign for wind or solar, right? Make sure that those easements that you are aware of them. If you have a fence, who's responsible, right? Well, if you share a fence with your neighbor, you are both responsible for covering it half of it. So half of the maintenance, half of the replacement. You are responsible for covering half of the cost of it. And so you're responsible for half. The general rule of thumb is you meet in the middle. Your right is your side and my right is my side. But if it's not even terrain, you're going to have to adjust. Next thing is water rights. Some areas of Nebraska have water rights. So if you are thinking maybe your land does, you need to consider hiring a Nebraska ag attorney for advice. Contact your local natural resources district. They regulate irrigation withdrawals. They regulate nitrogen application in some areas. Make sure that whatever stated in your NRD, any regulations there, whether it's pulling out water or nitrogen, that your lease reflects those items in your written lease to make sure that those are being followed. So you inherited the land, and I just like this graphic because it's okay to change things. You don't always have to stick with status quo if it's not working for you. So just because your loved one that you inherited the land had a handshake agreement for 50 years doesn't mean that you can't change it. If you are not getting along with your tenant, you can change it, right? We just have to go through the proper steps and make sure that we go in the right way. So it's okay to change. So, if you're wanting to change your handshake lease over to a written lease, it has to be done by September 1. Go ahead and give your tenant some heads up saying, "Hey, I'm gonna give you a termination notice, but we're just going to a written lease if you're keeping the same tenant." It's not the same for pasture. Again, we have a whole bunch of other documentation for lease law available on CAP, but the bare basics of a written lease, what I think everybody should include: the start and end date of a lease, how much termination is needed, if any. Is there a holdover clause? A lot of times I see farmers and landowners, they don't want to redraft that lease paper every single year, so they just sign it at the bottom and then date it, especially if it's a crop share, because nothing's really changing. If you have one of those and you do not have how a lease is going to be terminated, it's a worthless piece of paper. It's going to revert back to verbal law if it goes to court. You need to have when that lease is going to be negotiated. How much are they going to pay for the next term? When are the payments due? I always like to see the payment split in half, half at planting, half around harvest, so that a line of credit, an operating note is not sitting with all of the cash rent for the whole entire year. And then who's responsible for irrigation, for noxious weeds, for fences. The list is very extensive here. But line out who is responsible for paying for what. That way it doesn't allow any chances of feeling taken advantage of, and then good relationships can continue between new landowners and tenants. If you are wanting a new tenant and don't know where to start, Nebraska LandLink has this resource here. You can apply as a landowner, and we will try to match you with land seekers. We've had good success for either people entirely transitioning over their operation or just landowners that say, I want to find a tenant, maybe I want to go to a new and beginning farmer. It's really going to be catered on what you want, and I will try and find a match for you. And then you've had your land. It's been a little bit of time. We're not making any rash decisions right away, right? But now's the time to be thinking about if you've done some grieving and it's in a year or so later, how do you want your land to be owned? Or maybe you have experience with land ownership. Do you want to own it personally? It's simple. It's a little bit more complicated if you have multiple owners under that personal ownership, do you want to trust? It can avoid probate if it's set up right. It's good for estate planning, but unless you are willing to fund your trust. And when I say fund your trust, you got to take the initiative to feed it, right? It's like a kid you got to feed every single year. You got to transfer titles. You got to put money into it. You got to fund it. It requires some work. Maybe you want it in a trust though, and that's okay, but you got to be willing to put the time in for a trust. Or do you want an LLC? Again, LLC is going to require some work. It's really good for protecting your personal assets for multiple heirs, but again, it requires maintenance as well, and it needs some legal setup. Actually, we have a course now available. It's running right now on how to set up an LLC. Contact Ryan or myself if you want that information, or send us a chat. We can share it, but it's a really good legal checklist of how to set up your LLC. And then any landlord best practices. If I can give you any advice for your region, the thing is talk to your landowner or your tenant at least once a year, right? If you can't go out there, ask for photos. Ask for that update. It shows that you care about that land. Talk with your tenant, join our newsletters. We have a lot of these different meetings, and build your team, right? Who's any advisors that you need? Do you have an accountant, an ag accountant? Do you need an attorney, a banker, a farm manager? Whatever your team needs, make sure you find the right people for you. Speaking of team, this is our ag profitability team. There's 4 of us scattered throughout Nebraska. We really focus a lot on leasing and building those relationships with landowners and tenants, walking you guys through these steps. It's a big part of our job. So do not hesitate to reach out. You can find our resources at cap.unl.edu. It has our contact information as well as any articles, podcasts, or any of these recorded webinars that we've had in the past. You can find that information there. aglease101.org is a great source of examples of leases. You can pick out what you want, you can leave out what you don't, but it's a great resource for leases. And then also we have quarterly landlord tenant land management meetings that are coming up, as well as some landlord tenant cash rent workshops that we're going to be covering: flex leases, crop shares, cash rent, all of that, and other best practices for landlord tenants. But instead of limiting to 1 hour, we're going to be talking for 3. And then that is all I have. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Anastasia. Great presentation. And again, we do invite any questions you have here, type them into the Q&A or the chat, and we'll put those to Anastasia to answer here as we have a few minutes before our hour is up. And I did put some links into the chat as Anastasia was talking there. Again, we've got a lot of resources through Nebraska Extension and the Center for Ag Profitability. So I put the link in if you're interested in information about that course of forming an LLC for your business. That's in there, as well as what Anastasia just touched on, some upcoming landlord tenant cash rent workshops, as we're calling them. Those are scheduled over Central and Eastern Nebraska coming up next month. And the link for those is in the chat as well. So again, we welcome any questions if there are any in the next few minutes here. And I should say too, if you decide to close out of Zoom, you'll be presented with a very short survey that will just ask your opinion on today's webinar, how it went for you, and any ideas you have for future sessions that we can do here at CAP. It just takes probably 30 seconds to complete that, and we really value your feedback. So if you don't mind submitting that as you close out, we would really appreciate that. And this recording will be posted up later this afternoon, I believe, on our Center for Ag Profitability website. If you look at the webinar page at cap.unl.edu, We'll be back next Thursday when Anastasia's colleague Shannon Sand will be presenting part 3 of her series on livestock insurance options, as there's a lot to cover there. And this session will specifically look at the ins and outs of umbrella policies. So if you're interested in livestock insurance, that's a great opportunity to join us. And on that webinar page as well, you'll see the sign up for a webinar Anastasia is participating in a couple of weeks. As she mentioned, the Ag Land Management Quarterly webinar, where she'll be covering some of the topics that are relevant to landlords and tenants, again, in just a more concise hour-long presentation online rather than the 3 hours that you get at one of the meetings we've been talking about.
Mhm. Yes, we are covering, or I am covering terminating handshake agreements for landowners at that next land management quarterly.
That's perfect and timely.
Yep.
Well, so we've got a lot going on here as we roll into the fall season coming up at the Center for Ag Profitability. So we hope you'll keep up with it on our website at cap.unl.edu, and that will all be delivered to your inbox as well in newsletters. Most Tuesdays and Fridays are when those come out. So I don't see any questions right now, Anastasia, but definitely everyone, please feel free to reach out to us at the Center for Ag Profitability. Reach out to Anastasia if something comes to mind after this presentation, and we're always here to help and happy to do so. So with that, I think we can go ahead and close it out. Anastasia, thanks again for a great presentation. Thank you to everybody for joining today.
All right. Thank you, guys.